The rain had turned the street into a mirror, reflecting the gray sky and the dim glow of streetlights that had just flickered on against the early evening darkness. I almost missed it, the small leather rectangle half submerged in a puddle near the curb outside my apartment building. Something made me stop, maybe the bright blue corner peeking out from the water, too colorful to be trash. I bent down and picked it up, water dripping from my fingers. A wallet. Small, the kind made for a child. My first instinct was to leave it on the building's front desk, let someone else deal with it, but curiosity pulled at me. I flipped it open. Inside was a school ID card laminated and slightly worn at the edges. Thomas Thornhill, age 8, Westmont Academy. The photo showed a serious little boy with dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for his face. Behind the ID was a drawing, the kind children make with crayons, all bold lines and primary colors. A house. 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small. The paper had started to blur from the moisture. I carefully pulled it out and tucked it into my jacket to protect it. Then I saw the photograph wedged behind everything else. A man, not smiling. He stood in what looked like an expensive office, dark suit perfectly tailored, hands clasped in front of him. But it was his face that made my breath catch. Sharp angles, cold eyes, a mouth set in a line that suggested he had never learned how to smile, or had forgotten how. He looked dangerous. Not in the obvious way, not like the men who sometimes loitered outside the convenience store on the corner. This was different. This was power and violence wrapped in civility. Too dangerous to be anyone's father, yet here was his photo in a child's wallet. I checked the inside pocket and found a small address label, Westmont Academy, an address in the district across town where people did not worry about making rent. I should return it tomorrow, drop it at the school, let them contact the family. My hands were shaking slightly, and I told myself it was just the cold, just the rain soaking through my coat. I went inside, climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, and set the wallet on my kitchen counter. All evening I felt the weight of it, that small leather rectangle holding a child's treasures, and that photograph of a man who looked like he could make people disappear. At midnight, I gave up on sleep and went to the window. That was when I saw it. The black car parked directly across the street, engine running, exhaust visible in the cold air. No one got out. No one moved. It just sat there, watching. My heart began to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stepped back from the window, suddenly certain I had made a terrible mistake by picking up that wallet, by bringing it into my home, by seeing that photograph. But it was too late now. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. The black car was gone by morning, but the unease it left behind clung to me like smoke. I barely slept, checking the window every hour until gray dawn light finally bled across the sky. I called in sick to work, something I never did. And by 9 in the morning, I was on the crosstown bus clutching the small wallet in my jacket pocket like evidence of a crime I had not meant to commit. Westmont Academy occupied an entire block in a neighborhood where the streets were clean and the buildings wore their wealth like armor. Iron gates, manicured lawns despite the season. A security guard who looked at me with polite suspicion as I explained I needed to return something to a student. He made a phone call, then waved me through to the main building. The administration office smelled like expensive wood polish and old money. A woman behind the desk, gray hair pulled into a severe bun, barely looked up when I approached. I explained I had found a wallet belonging to Thomas Thornhill. I set it on her desk. She picked it up, examined it with the kind of thoroughness that made me feel like I was being evaluated along with the object. "Thomas has already been picked up," she said, her voice clipped and precise. "I can see that he gets this." I thanked her and turned to leave, relief flooding through me. I had done the right thing. It was over. I made it halfway across the marble lobby before a voice stopped me. "Miss." I turned. The man wore a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had seen violence and had not looked away. His eyes were flat and assessing. "I am James Redmond. I work for the Thornhill family." My throat went dry. He closed the distance between us with measured steps. "I understand you found the boy's wallet." "Yes," I managed. "I found it last night outside my building." "Where exactly?" He pulled out a phone, opened a map application. I leaned in and pointed to my street, my building. My hands were shaking. He noticed. "What time?" "Around 6, maybe a little after." "It was raining. Was anyone else around? Did you see anyone watching the area?" I tried to remember. "A few people coming home from work. A couple walking a dog. No one who seemed out of place." "Why?" He ignored my question. "Did you look inside the wallet?" "Just to find the school address so I could return it." His eyes held mine for a long moment, and I felt like he was reading every secret I had ever kept. "You live alone." It was not a question, but I nodded anyway. "And you work where?" I told him. "Kindergarten teacher at PS 47 across town." He typed something into his phone. "I will need your phone number. Someone will be in touch to follow up." The way he said it made it clear this was not optional. I recited the numbers, watching him enter them with steady fingers. When he looked up again, something in his expression had shifted, not warmer, but more decided. "Thank you for returning the wallet, Miss Sinclair. The Thornhill family appreciates your honesty." He knew my name. I had not told him my name. He turned and walked away before I could ask how, leaving me standing in that expensive lobby with the certainty settling in my bones that I should have lied about everything, should have dropped the wallet in a mailbox and walked away, should have never picked it up at all. I came home to find him sitting in my living room. The shock hit me like cold water, stealing my breath, freezing me in the doorway with my keys still in my hand. Alexander Thornhill, the man from the photograph. He sat in my only decent chair, the one I had found at a thrift store and reupholstered myself, and he looked entirely at ease, like he had every right to be there, like my locked door and my privacy meant nothing against his will. He was larger than I had imagined, broader through the shoulders, and the expensive suit he wore made my small apartment look even shabbier by comparison. His face was exactly as dangerous in person as it had been in that photograph, all sharp angles and cold assessment, but there was something else too, something that had not translated through the image. Presence. He filled the space like a coming storm, like the moment before lightning strikes, when the air goes heavy and charged. "Please sit," he said, and his voice was low, calm, terrifyingly calm. I remained frozen. He gestured to my own couch. "Miss Sinclair, sit down." It was not a request. My legs carried me forward and I sat, perched on the edge of the cushion, my keys cutting into my palm where I clutched them like a weapon that could never protect me from this. I wanted to ask how he got in, wanted to demand he leave, wanted to scream, but my voice had abandoned me. "Thank you for returning my son's wallet," he said. "I appreciate your honesty. That could have been the end of it, except I need to understand exactly how you came to find it. Where? What time? Did you see anyone else in the area?" I told him everything I had already told James Redmond, my voice shaking despite my efforts to control it. He listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving my face. Those eyes were gray, I realized, the color of steel or winter skies, and they saw too much. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward slightly, and the movement made me flinch. "My son lost that wallet near a location he should never have been," he said. "Someone took him somewhere without my knowledge or permission. Someone in my organization, or outside it, decided to move an 8-year-old child without authorization. You found the wallet 6 blocks from where Thomas was supposed to be that evening." I felt the blood drain from my face. I did not know. I just found it and wanted to return it. I believe you, he said. But the words did not comfort me because his expression had not changed. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now you are a witness to something you do not understand. I cannot let you walk away without knowing whether you are a threat, or a plant from rival families, or simply an innocent bystander. I am just a teacher, I whispered. I know, he said. I know everything about you now, Eleanor. Where you work, where you grew up, your bank balance, your student loans, the fact that you volunteer at the church food pantry on Saturdays. I know you are exactly who you appear to be, but belief is not the same as certainty, and in my world, uncertainty gets people killed. His eyes held mine, and I saw something flicker in them, something that might have been regret, or might have been something else entirely. You will be watched, he said, for your protection as much as mine. If you are innocent, then you have nothing to fear, but you need to understand that you are in this now, whether you want to be or not. He stood and I realized how tall he was, how much space he commanded. When he looked down at me, I felt it, that pull beneath the terror, that dangerous magnetic thing I did not want to name. Be careful, Eleanor, he said softly. My world is not kind to good people. Then he walked past me and let himself out, leaving me shaking on my own couch in my own apartment that no longer felt like mine at all. He did not leave immediately. After delivering his warning about being watched, Alexander moved to the window and stood there looking down at the street below, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders tense beneath the perfect lines of his suit. I remained on the couch, my heart hammering, trying to understand what had just happened to my life. The silence stretched between us, heavy and charged, until finally he spoke again without turning around. The location where you found the wallet was outside a building owned by the Volkov family. They run drugs and weapons through the Port District, and they have been testing my boundaries for months. If they took my son, even for an hour, even just to send a message, then we are at war. But if it was someone inside my organization who moved Thomas without authorization, then I have a traitor, and that is worse. Either way, you are the only person outside my inner circle who knows that wallet was found 6 blocks from where Thomas was supposed to be. He turned then, and the look on his face was something between fury and desperation. Do you understand what I am telling you? You are either a witness or you are involved, and until I know which, I cannot let you disappear. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I am not involved. I found a child's wallet and tried to do the right thing. That is all. I know, he said again, and this time there was something different in his tone, something almost gentle beneath the steel. I have had you investigated thoroughly in the last 6 hours. You are exactly what you appear to be. A good person who helps children and volunteers and pays her bills on time. You have no connection to any criminal organization, no suspicious contacts, no reason to be part of this. But my enemies do not know that, and some of them would be very interested in anyone who suddenly appears in my life or my son's life. So you will be protected whether you want it or not, because if something happens to you, it will be because of me, and I do not allow collateral damage when I can prevent it. The way he said it made something twist in my chest. This was not kindness. This was control. This was a man who could not tolerate loose ends or unprotected vulnerabilities. I wanted to argue, to throw him out, to reclaim my life, but I could see in his eyes that it would be pointless. I did not choose this, I said. No, he agreed. You did not. But here we are. He moved toward the door, and I thought he would leave, but he paused with his hand on the knob and looked back at me. His eyes held mine for a moment too long, and I felt it then, that thing I did not want to name, that pull beneath the fear. He was dangerous, and I should have been thinking only of escape, but instead I was noticing the way his jaw tightened, the shadow of stubble along it, the surprising fullness of his mouth. My whole body went hot with shame at the observation. Be careful, Eleanor, he said quietly, and I could not tell if he was warning me about his enemies or about himself. Then he was gone, and I sat alone in my violated apartment, shaking not just with fear, but with something else, something that felt like the moment before falling. The days that followed became an exercise in paranoia I had never imagined possible. I saw them everywhere. The black sedan parked across from my building when I left for work at 7 in the morning. The man in the gray jacket reading a newspaper in the coffee shop where I bought my tea. The same man I had seen outside the grocery store the evening before. The SUV with tinted windows that followed 3 cars behind me on my commute. I knew they were there, and they knew I knew, and nobody pretended otherwise. It was a strange kind of psychological warfare, being watched so openly, and I could not decide if Alexander meant it as protection, or intimidation, or both. At school, I tried to focus on my students, on the lesson plans and the small dramas of 5-year-olds learning to share and spell their names, but I kept replaying that night in my apartment. The way Alexander had filled the space, the sound of his voice, the moment when his eyes had held mine, and I had felt something I should not feel for a man who had broken into my home and threatened my freedom. I told myself it was just adrenaline, just fear twisting itself into something else, but alone at night I could not lie to myself as easily. Then on the 4th day after Alexander had sat in my living room, Thomas Thornhill walked into my classroom. I was helping another student with her coat when I looked up and saw him standing in the doorway holding his father's hand, a small backpack over his shoulders, his eyes wide and uncertain. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might be sick. Alexander met my gaze over his son's head, and his expression was unreadable. "This is Miss Sinclair," he told Thomas gently. "She is going to be your new teacher." Thomas looked up at me, and I saw none of his father's danger in that small face, only the nervousness of a child entering a new place where he knew no one. "Hi, Thomas," I managed, my voice sounding almost normal. "We are very happy to have you here." Alexander stayed for several minutes, speaking quietly with me while Thomas examined the classroom with careful curiosity. "He enrolled today," Alexander said, and there was something in his tone that dared me to object. I thought a smaller school might suit him better, more personal attention. I understood immediately. This was not about education, this was about proximity and testing and control. Alexander had pulled his son from an exclusive private academy and placed him in my public school kindergarten because he wanted to watch how I treated the boy, wanted to study my reactions, wanted me under observation in a way that felt even more invasive than the men in cars outside my apartment. He was using his own child as surveillance. The realization should have filled me with anger, but instead, I felt something closer to despair because I could see the calculation behind it, and I could not even argue it was wrong. If I was a threat, putting Thomas near me would expose it. If I was innocent, I would treat him with the same care I gave all my students. Either way, Alexander would have his answer. I looked at Thomas, who was now examining the reading corner with shy interest, and then back at his father. "He will be safe here," I said quietly. "I will make sure of it." Alexander's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval or might have been satisfaction. "I know you will," he said. "That is why he is here." Then he crouched down to say goodbye to his son, and I saw the gentleness in the gesture, the way he touched Thomas's hair and spoke softly, and I understood with perfect clarity that this was indeed a test, but not only of me. Alexander was testing whether I could be trusted with the thing he loved most in this world, and the weight of that responsibility settled over me like a sentence I had not chosen, but could not escape. Thomas turned out to be the kind of child who made teaching feel like purpose rather than work. He was quiet those first days, watchful in the way children are when they have learned too early that the world requires caution, but there was sweetness beneath the careful exterior. He shared his crayons without being asked, helped a classmate who spilled juice at snack time, and listened to stories with an intensity that suggested he was hungry for normal things, for mundane kindness. I caught myself watching him more than I should, looking for signs of his father in the tilt of his head or the set of his jaw, but mostly, I just saw a small boy trying to find his place in a new environment. I treated him exactly as I treated every other student because that was my job, and also because I knew Alexander was watching and I would not give him reason to doubt me. But the truth was, it required no effort. Thomas made it easy to care. At pickup on the third day, Alexander arrived 10 minutes early and waited outside the classroom door while I finished reading to the children. When I dismissed them, he lingered after Thomas ran to get his backpack, and I felt that same tension I had felt in my apartment, that awareness of him taking up space and air. "How is he doing?" Alexander asked, and there was something in his voice that was not interrogation but genuine concern. "He is wonderful," I said, and meant it. "He is kind to the other children, and he loves the books. He has been smiling more each day." Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a softness that transformed his face from dangerous to something closer to human. "He asked to come here," Alexander said quietly, "to this school. He told me the other place made him feel like he was in a cage. All those security protocols and handlers and children whose parents saw him as either a threat or an opportunity. He said he wanted to go somewhere normal, and when I asked him what that meant, he said he wanted a teacher who looked at him like he was just a kid." I felt my throat tighten at that, and I looked through the classroom door at Thomas, who was now showing another boy a drawing he had made. "Your son is just a kid," I said. "Whatever else is true, he is just a child and he deserves to be treated like one." Alexander's eyes found mine and held them, and I saw something I had not expected to see in a man like him. Gratitude, vulnerability, fear beneath the armor. "I did not want to move him," he admitted. "The security here is minimal compared to the academy. There are a dozen ways someone could get to him if they wanted to. But he was so unhappy, and I will not let this life take everything from him." He paused, and the weight of what he was not saying settled between us. "Thank you for making him feel safe." It was the first time he had thanked me for anything other than returning the wallet, and it felt like a turning point, like a door opening between us that neither of us had consciously chosen to unlock. I saw past the dangerous exterior then to the father beneath, the man who would risk his son's safety for his son's happiness. And I understood that whatever else Alexander Thornhill was, he loved his child with a fierceness that made him almost reckless. That realization changed something fundamental in how I saw him, and I knew even as it happened that I was in danger of a different kind now. Alexander started arriving earlier to pick up, sometimes by 15 or 20 minutes, and he would stand at the back of the classroom watching while I finished the day's activities with the children. At first, his presence made me hyper-aware of every word I spoke and every movement I made. But after several days, I found myself almost comfortable with him there, this dangerous man leaning against the wall with his expensive suit and his careful eyes, watching his son play with blocks or listening to me read a story about talking animals. When the other children left, Thomas would sometimes stay a few extra minutes, showing his father a painting or a project, and Alexander would crouch down to his son's level and examine whatever small creation was offered with a seriousness that made my chest ache. Then Thomas would run to get his things, and Alexander and I would be alone for stolen moments that began to stretch longer each day. He asked me about teaching, about why I had chosen this work, and I found myself telling him things I had not told anyone in years, about wanting to give children the stability I had not always had, about believing that small kindnesses could change lives. He listened with an attention that felt rare and valuable, like I was saying something that mattered rather than just filling silence. I asked him careful questions in return, testing the boundaries of what he would answer, and he surprised me with his honesty. He never lied, but he spoke in ways that acknowledged what we both knew without saying it directly, telling me about the business that required his constant attention, about the men who depended on him for their livelihoods, about the codes and structures that governed his world. It was like learning a new language where every word carried double meaning. The attraction built in the spaces between our words, in the way his eyes followed me when I moved around the classroom putting away supplies, in the way he said my name, Eleanor, like he was tasting something he wanted more of. I caught myself noticing details I should not notice. The way his hands looked when he helped Thomas with his coat, the line of his jaw, the rare moments when he almost smiled. But the men still watched my apartment every night, and I knew I was not free, that whatever was growing between Alexander and me existed inside a cage of his making. Then one evening after Thomas had run ahead to the car, Alexander stayed behind and asked if I would have dinner with him. To discuss Thomas's progress, he added, but we both knew it was not really about his son. I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain screamed that having dinner with a man like Alexander Thornhill was crossing a line I could not uncross. But I heard myself saying yes before I could think better of it, and the look in his eyes when I agreed was something between satisfaction and relief, like he had been uncertain of my answer, and my acceptance meant more than it should. We made arrangements for 2 nights later, and as I walked to my car, I felt the weight of the decision settling over me, the knowledge that I was stepping deliberately toward danger, toward a man whose world could swallow me whole. I was not being pulled or coerced anymore. I was choosing this, whatever this was, and that terrified me more than anything else. The restaurant was the kind of place I had only seen in magazines, all low lighting and leather banquets and waiters who moved like dancers, and from the moment we walked through the door, I felt the wrongness of my simple black dress and borrowed coat. But then I saw how the staff reacted to Alexander, and I understood I was entering his kingdom. They knew him, deferred to him, led us to a corner table that offered privacy and sightlines to every entrance, and I realized he had chosen this specific spot out of habit or necessity, always watching, always aware. I sat across from him and tried not to feel like I was playing a part in someone else's life. He ordered wine without asking me, and normally that would have annoyed me, but somehow it felt natural, like he was taking care of details so I could breathe. We talked about safe things at first, the weather and the restaurant and inconsequential topics that felt like warmth exercises before the real conversation. But then he asked me why I became a teacher, and I found myself telling him the truth. About my mother who worked 3 jobs and still could not quite make ends meet. About the teacher who noticed I came to school hungry and kept granola bars in her desk. About learning that small acts of attention could mean survival for a child, and deciding I wanted to be that person for someone else. He listened with that same focused intensity he brought to everything, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment before telling me about Thomas's mother. Her name was Catherine, and she had been the daughter of a business associate. Their marriage more alliance than romance at first, but they had built something real over the years. She died in a car accident when Thomas was 5, sudden and brutal, and Alexander said it like he was reporting facts, but I could hear the grief underneath. He told me he had tried to give Thomas as normal a life as possible after that, but normal was not really available to the son of a man like him, that every choice was a calculation of risk and reward, safety versus happiness. I asked him if he ever regretted the life he led, and he looked at me for a long moment before saying he regretted what it cost the people around him, but the life itself was what he knew, what he was built for, and leaving it was not an option that existed. The masks we both wore slipped during that dinner, and I saw the man beneath the power, someone who carried impossible weight and tried to protect a child from a world he himself had created. When he drove me home, his hand brushed mine as he shifted gears, and the touch burned through me like current, undeniable and terrifying. He walked me to my door and stood too close, and I could feel the wanting radiating between us like heat, but he did not push, just told me good night, Eleanor, in that voice that made my name sound like something precious. And I went inside shaking with the knowledge that I was falling for a man who could destroy me without even meaning to. The phone ripped me from sleep at 4:47 in the morning, and I knew before I answered that something had shattered. Alexander's voice was controlled, but I could hear the fury beneath it like magma under stone, telling me there had been an attempt on his home, that Thomas was safe but frightened, that he was moving his son to a secure location across the city and he needed my help. "Thomas trusts you," he said, and the rawness in those words cut through my sleep fog and fear. "He will be calm if you are there." I should have refused. Every self-preservation instinct I possessed screamed that I was already too deep in this dangerous world, and stepping further in would drown me. But I heard myself saying yes, asking what he needed me to do, already climbing out of bed and reaching for clothes. He told me a car would arrive in 20 minutes, and I should pack nothing, bring nothing that could be traced or tracked. Just come. The line went dead, and I stood in my dark bedroom with my heart hammering against my ribs, understanding that this was a choice point, that I could simply not answer the door when the car arrived, could call in sick to school, and pretend this life was not pulling me under. Instead, I dressed in jeans and a sweater, splashed water on my face, and was waiting on the street when the black SUV pulled up with James Redman in the driver's seat. He said nothing during the drive through the empty pre-dawn streets, but I caught him watching me in the rearview mirror like he was calculating my worth or my threat level. We drove to a part of the city I barely recognized, towers of glass and steel that housed wealth I could not imagine, and pulled into an underground garage that required 3 separate security clearances. The elevator rose so fast my ears popped, and then the doors opened directly into a penthouse that looked like something from a film. All clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city sprawled below in the gray early light. Alexander was there immediately, and he looked like violence barely contained, his jacket gone and his shirt sleeves rolled up, and something fierce and terrible in his eyes that made me understand for the first time what he was truly capable of. Then Thomas ran to me from across the room and wrapped his small arms around my waist, and I felt him shaking. I knelt down and held him, this frightened child who should never have to know fear like this. And when I looked up, Alexander was watching us with an expression I could not name, something between gratitude and devastation. I took Thomas to the room James showed me, a bedroom decorated in soft blues, with books on the shelves, and toys still in packages, like Alexander kept this place ready for exactly this kind of emergency. I read to Thomas from a book about a bear and a rabbit, my voice steady even though my hands trembled, and slowly his breathing evened and his eyes grew heavy. When he finally slept, I stayed beside the bed watching him in the growing dawn light. And when I turned, Alexander was in the doorway watching me with something that looked like reverence, like I had done something miraculous, instead of simply reading a story to a scared child. I slipped out of Thomas's room and closed the door softly behind me, the click of the latch unnaturally loud in the hushed penthouse. And when I turned, Alexander was still standing there in the hallway watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. He gestured toward the living room, and I followed him into that vast space with windows showing the city waking below us in shades of pink and gold, beautiful and distant, like we existed in a separate world above it all. He poured himself whiskey from a crystal decanter, even though it was barely past 6 in the morning, and I understood he needed something to do with his hands, some action to channel whatever was running through him. "Thank you," he said finally, his back still to me, "for coming, for being what Thomas needed." I told him it was nothing, automatic deflection, but he turned then and the look on his face stopped my breath. "It is not nothing, Eleanor. You came into danger for my son, for me." I wanted to say I had not thought about it that way, had simply reacted, but that would have been a lie and we were past lying to each other. "I came because you asked," I said, and the truth of it hung between us like a confession. He crossed halfway to me and stopped, and I could see him wrestling with something, some internal war playing out in the tension of his shoulders and the tightness around his eyes. "You should run from me," he said, voice rough. "You should go back to your life and forget you ever found that wallet." "My world destroys good things, Eleanor. It takes soft, beautiful things and twists them until they break. I felt anger flash through me, hot and sudden. Do I look broken to you? Do I look like I do not understand what I am choosing? I am terrified, Alexander. I am so scared sometimes I cannot sleep, but I cannot seem to walk away from you. I do not want to. He closed the remaining distance between us in 3 strides, and suddenly his hands were framing my face, and his forehead pressed against mine, and I could feel him shaking, or maybe that was me. I have tried to stay away from you, he said against my mouth, tried to keep this professional, safe. But Eleanor, I cannot. I do not know how to be near you and not want everything. The kiss was inevitable, a storm that had been building since the moment he sat in my apartment weeks ago, desperate and fierce and full of all the tension we had been carrying. His mouth on mine tasted like whiskey and want, and I kissed him back with every forbidden thing I had been feeling, my hands fisting in his shirt to pull him closer. He made a sound low in his throat and backed me against the window, the glass cold against my spine, his body heat searing everywhere we touched. Then the elevator chimed and we broke apart gasping as James stepped into the penthouse, his expression carefully neutral, but I knew he had seen, knew what he had interrupted. "We have an identification," James said to Alexander. "All business, the family responsible, all 3 responsible parties confirmed." Alexander's entire demeanor shifted in an instant, the man who had been kissing me disappearing behind the mask of someone capable of terrible things. "Where?" he said, already moving away from me. James rattled off an address and details I only half heard through the rushing in my ears. I watched Alexander transform fully into the dangerous creature I had always known lived beneath the surface, watched him give James orders in a voice like iron, and understood with cold clarity that he was about to go do violence, about to become fully the thing his world required. He turned back to me before leaving, caught my face in his hands one more time, and kissed me hard and fast. "Stay with Thomas," he said. "I will come back to you." Then he was gone, and I was alone with the taste of him still on my lips, and fear blooming in my chest like ice. The elevator doors closed behind Alexander and James, and I stood in the vast silence of the penthouse, feeling like I had been dropped into cold water, my lungs tight and my thoughts spinning. 2 men remained as security, stationed by the elevator and near the windows, professional and distant and armed. I went back to Thomas's room and found him still sleeping, his face peaceful in a way that broke my heart, because children should not need fortified safe houses and armed guards. I settled into the chair near his bed and watched the city beyond the windows grow brighter as morning came fully, and I tried not to think about what Alexander was doing, where he had gone, what neutralizing a threat actually meant in his world. Thomas woke around 8 and looked momentarily confused before he saw me and smiled, and I pushed everything else down to focus on him. We had breakfast that one of the security men brought up, pancakes and fruit that Thomas picked at while asking questions I deflected. "Where is Dad? When can we go home? Is someone bad trying to hurt us?" I told him his father had business to handle, that we were safe here, that sometimes grown-ups had to deal with complicated things. He accepted this with the resignation of a child who had heard versions of it before, and my chest ached for what his young life had already taught him. We played games I invented from things I found in the penthouse, built a fort from couch cushions, read every book on his shelf twice. Hours crawled past with no word, and my fear grew teeth. What if Alexander did not come back? What if whatever he had gone to do consumed him? If the violence of his world finally took him the way it had taken Thomas's mother? I realized with startling clarity that I had fallen for him completely, that somewhere between the terror of finding him in my apartment and the tenderness of watching him with his son, I had crossed a line I could not uncross. I loved him. This dangerous, impossible man who lived in a world of blood and power, I loved him, and the thought of losing him hollowed me out. Thomas fell asleep again in the blanket fort around 2 in the afternoon, exhausted from fear and disrupted routine, and I sat beside him feeling helpless and angry at myself for caring this much, for letting myself become tangled in something so far beyond my understanding. Then, at 4:17, the elevator chimed, and my heart stopped. Alexander stepped out, and he was unharmed, no visible injuries, but something in his eyes made me go cold. Violence clung to him like smoke, in the rigid set of his shoulders and the way he moved through the space like a predator returning from a hunt. He looked at me, and some of the hardness cracked. He disappeared down a hallway, and I heard water running. Understood he was washing away whatever he had done. When he emerged 20 minutes later in clean clothes with damp hair, he looked more human, but the edge had not completely faded. He came to where I sat and pulled me up into his arms and held me so tightly I could barely breathe. "It is done," he said against my hair. "The threat is neutralized. They will not come for him again." I should have asked what neutralized meant, what he had done, how final it was. I did not. I just held him back and was grateful he had come home. Life tried to return to something resembling normal in the days that followed, a fragile normalcy that felt like walking on glass. Thomas went back to school, and I returned to my classroom, where 18 kindergartners needed me to be steady and calm, even though my hands shook when I poured morning juice. Alexander established a routine of dropping Thomas off himself each morning, arriving in cars that cost more than I would make in 5 years, and he would linger at the classroom door finding excuses to steal 2 more minutes with me. How did he sleep? Is he eating lunch? Small questions that were really just reasons to stand close enough that I could smell his cologne and feel the heat of him. Other parents noticed. I saw them whispering in the parking lot, saw the way conversations stopped when I approached the staff lounge. Karen Westfield, mother of twin boys in my class, asked me pointedly if I knew what kind of man Alexander Thornhill was, if I understood his reputation. I told her with more ice in my voice than I knew I possessed that Thomas was a sweet child who deserved the same care as every student. She backed off, but the looks continued. Then Principal Morrison called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon, her expression serious and careful. "Eleanor," she said, and I knew from her tone this was going to be bad. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Is there anything concerning about Thomas Thornhill's home environment? Anything that might require intervention?" I felt anger flare white-hot in my chest. "Thomas is well cared for," I said. "He is clean, fed, loved. His father is attentive and involved." She pressed. "But given Alexander Thornhill's reputation, his known associations, I have a responsibility to ensure the child is safe." I defended Alexander perhaps too fiercely, heard my voice rise as I listed all the ways he showed up for his son, all the evidence of his devotion. Morrison watched me with something like pity in her eyes. "You care about him," she said quietly. "Not just the boy. Be careful, Eleanor. Men like that do not have happy endings." I left her office shaking and went home to my small apartment that still felt empty now, too quiet after nights in the penthouse. Alexander called that evening and asked to see me. We met at a park near the river where the lights reflected gold on black water. He told me his world had noticed me, that people within his organization were talking. "Some see you as a weakness," he said, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight with tension. "Something they could use against me. Others see you as leverage, a way to ensure my cooperation or compliance. You are in danger because of me, Eleanor, because I could not stay away from you." I felt cold despite the mild night. "What are you saying?" He turned to face me fully, and his eyes were devastating. "I am saying I should end this. Walk away from you before someone decides to use you to hurt me. It would be safer for you if I disappeared from your life. Take Thomas out of your school. Stop coming around. Let you go back to being invisible." The word invisible hit me like a slap, and suddenly I was angry, furious at him for making this decision without me. Do I get a say in this? Do I get to choose what risks I take? He stepped closer. You do not understand what you would be choosing. Eleanor, these are not idle threats. These are people who would hurt you to make a point, who would take you to control me. I cut him off. I am choosing this. I am choosing you. I know what you are, Alexander. I know your world is dangerous and dark, and that being close to you puts a target on me. I am terrified, but I am still here. I am still choosing to be here. So do not make this choice for me. Do not take away my agency because you think you are protecting me. He pulled me against him then, his arms coming around me like he could shield me from his own world by sheer force of will. You are either very brave or very foolish, he said against my hair. Maybe both, I whispered back. But I am yours if you will have me. I came home on a Tuesday to find my apartment door slightly ajar, and the cold terror that flooded through me was immediate and absolute. I stood in the hallway for 10 seconds that felt like hours, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I pushed the door open with trembling fingers and stepped inside to find everything wrong in ways I could not immediately name. Nothing was destroyed, nothing was obviously missing. But drawers had been opened and carefully closed, books shifted on shelves, the contents of my desk subtly disturbed. Someone had gone through my life with methodical precision, touching everything, learning me, and then left the door open just enough so I would know. The message was clear. We can reach you whenever we want. I called Alexander with shaking hands, and he answered on the first ring, his voice sharp. What is wrong? I told him and heard something dangerous enter his tone. Do not touch anything. I am sending men now. Stay in the hallway. He arrived 20 minutes later with James and 3 others, and he pulled me against him briefly before going inside with controlled fury radiating from every movement. They searched with professional efficiency and found nothing, no bugs or cameras or physical threats, just the violation of my space and the terror it created. Alexander emerged, and his face was carved from stone. Pack a bag, he said. You are coming home with me. Not a request. An order delivered with absolute certainty. I should have protested the high-handedness, should have argued for my independence and my right to stay in my own home. Instead, I felt relief crash over me like a wave, the exhausting fear of the last weeks finally breaking. I packed while he stood in the doorway watching the street, and 40 minutes later I was in his car, heading across the city to the fortress he called home. Thomas was delighted when we arrived, his face lighting up in a way that made my chest tight. Are you staying now? For a while, I told him, and Alexander corrected me with quiet certainty. For as long as she wants. We fell into a routine that felt surreal in its domesticity. Dinners together at the long table where Thomas chattered about school and Alexander listened with focus that never wavered. Homework at the kitchen counter where I helped with reading, while Alexander reviewed reports that probably detailed things I did not want to know. Bedtime stories where Thomas insisted I read, and Alexander sat in the doorway listening. I saw the life Alexander wanted beneath the one he led, glimpsed the man he might have been in another world. He was gentle with his son, patient and present in ways that contradicted everything his reputation suggested. With me, he was increasingly tender, his touches lingering, his eyes tracking me through rooms like he was afraid I might disappear. I fell deeper every day, into him and into this strange, dangerous family we were building. But James pulled Alexander aside one evening, and I heard pieces of their conversation through walls not meant to keep secrets. She makes you vulnerable. Thomas and her together, it is too much exposure. The Kozlov faction is making moves, testing boundaries. They will see this and use it. Alexander's response was too quiet to hear, but James emerged looking grim, and I knew the reprieve was temporary. Danger was circling closer, and I was no longer a bystander but a piece on the board. The attack came on a Wednesday during morning recess, when the air was cold enough to see breath, and the playground was full of children bundled in bright coats. I was standing near the fence helping Mia with her shoelaces when I saw them. 3 men moving through the parent pickup area with purpose that did not belong, their eyes scanning the children with predatory focus. Something in my chest went tight and cold. Wrong. Everything about them was wrong. The way they moved together, the way their hands stayed inside their jackets, the way they locked onto Thomas where he played on the swings with Emma and David. I did not think. I ran. "Thomas!" I called, keeping my voice steady even as terror clawed up my throat. "Come here, please. Emma, David, inside now." They heard something in my tone because all 3 came immediately, Thomas's face curious. The other children sensing my fear. I grabbed Thomas's hand and moved fast toward the building, herding Emma and David ahead of me, aware of the men changing direction, closing distance. We made it inside and I slammed the door, threw the lock, pulled all 3 children away from the windows. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone, but I got it out, hit Alexander's number, dragged the children into the supply closet. He answered instantly. "They are here," I said, "at the school. 3 men trying to take Thomas. I have him locked in my classroom, but Alexander." I heard gunfire outside, sharp cracks that made all 3 children scream, and I pulled them against me, made myself into a shield with my body. "Stay down," I told them. "Stay quiet. Help is coming." More gunfire, shouting. The sounds of violence bleeding through walls that suddenly felt thin as paper. I held Thomas and Emma and David and prayed to gods I did not believe in, felt minutes stretch into hours. Emma was crying silently against my shoulder. David had his eyes squeezed shut. Thomas looked at me with trust I did not deserve and said, "My dad is coming. He will fix it." 8 minutes that aged me years. Then silence, abrupt and complete, more terrifying than the noise. Footsteps in the hallway. My heart stopped. "Eleanor." Alexander's voice through the door, rough with something I could not name. "It is me. Open the door." I stumbled up, unlocked it with shaking hands, pulled it open to find Alexander standing there in clothes spattered with blood that was not his, flanked by James and 4 others, all armed. The hallway behind them was empty, but I saw broken glass, bullet holes in walls. He looked at me for one endless second, then passed me to where Thomas stood. "Dad," Thomas said, small and scared, and Alexander moved, dropped to his knees, pulled his son into his arms with fierce desperation. "You are safe," he said against Thomas's hair. "You are safe now." Then he stood, Thomas still in his arms, and reached for me with his free hand, pulled me against them both. "You saved him," he said, his eyes burning into mine. "You saw them. You got him inside. You saved his life." I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. James was on his phone calling parents for Emma and David, arranging explanations I could not process. Alexander held me and Thomas like he could bind us to him by will alone. I realized in that moment, pressed against him with his son between us and violence still echoing in my ears, that I was fully in this now, that there was no going back to the woman I had been before I found a wallet on a rain-soaked street. This was my life now. This danger, this man, this child. I had chosen it, and it had chosen me, and we were bound together in ways that could not be undone. Alexander left the house that night at 9 and did not tell me where he was going, but I saw the look he exchanged with James and understood that the reckoning had come. I put Thomas to bed and read him 2 extra stories, holding him close while my mind spun with images of violence I could not stop. The house was full of Alexander's men, silent presences in hallways and doorways, and I knew they were there as much to keep me contained as protected. I did not sleep. I sat in the living room watching the city lights and waiting for news that might never come, for the phone call that would tell me Alexander was dead or arrested or simply gone. He returned at 4 in the morning, and I heard him before I saw him, the sound of the door opening and James's low voice, and then his footsteps heavy on the stairs. I met him in the hallway, and he stopped when he saw me, his face carved with exhaustion and something darker. "It is done," he said. "The Kozlov leadership no longer exists." I should have been horrified. I should have recoiled from the blood I knew was on his hands, even if I could not see it. Instead, I crossed to him and put my arms around him and felt him sag against me, like a man who had carried weight too long. He showered for 30 minutes, and when he emerged, he looked almost human again, the monster tucked back beneath the surface. We sat together in his study, and he told me without detail that the threat was eliminated, that he had moved decisively and brutally, that the other families would fall in line now or face the same fate. Then he said something that made my breath catch. "I am restructuring my operations, stepping back from direct involvement in anything that cannot be legitimized. I have lawyers working on transitioning assets, cleaning up enterprises that can be cleaned, shutting down what cannot. It will take years, but Thomas deserves a father who might live to see him graduate, and you deserve a man who does not come home with blood under his fingernails." I stared at him. "You are doing this for us. For Thomas," he said. "For you. You have changed what I want, Eleanor. I used to think power was enough, that control of this city was worth any cost. Now I look at you reading to my son, and I want different things. I want dinners at that table. I want to watch Thomas grow up. I want mornings waking next to you without wondering if today is the day someone finally gets through my defenses. I want a life." He reached for my hand and his grip was fierce. "Stay," he said. "Not because it is safer, not because Thomas needs you, but because I need you. I am asking you to stay permanently, to build this life with me. And I know I have no right after dragging you into hell, but I am asking anyway, because I love you." He had never said it before. The words hung in the air between us, raw and undefended, and I saw in his eyes that he meant them absolutely. "I love you, Eleanor. Stay." I kissed him with tears on my face and said yes, said I love you too. Acknowledged the impossible truth that I loved this dangerous, complicated man and the life we were building from ashes and choices that could not be undone. 3 months passed like water finding new channels, reshaping everything in its path until the landscape of my life was unrecognizable from what it had been before I found a wallet on a rain-soaked street. I still taught kindergarten, still arrived at school each morning with lesson plans and patience for 20 small chaotic humans. But now I left from a house with security gates and returned to a home where Alexander waited with Thomas, where dinner was a ritual we protected fiercely against the intrusions of his world. The organization had accepted me in the way they accepted all of Alexander's decisions, with deference that was half respect and half fear, and I was known now as protected, as his, as untouchable. Thomas called me Ellie in a tone that carried weight beyond friendship, that sounded like family, like something permanent. I had not replaced his mother and never would, but I had become essential in ways that terrified and completed me. He did his homework at the kitchen table while I cooked, asked me to check his spelling, told me about his day with the assumption that I would always be there to listen. Alexander watched us with an expression I had learned to read, hunger and gratitude and fear all tangled together, the look of a man who had been given something precious and could not quite believe it would not be taken away. On a Tuesday evening in early spring, when the light lasted longer and the air smelled like possibility, Alexander asked me to walk with him in the garden, and I knew before he spoke that something had shifted. Thomas was inside with James learning chess, their voices drifting through open windows, and we were alone among the roses Alexander's late wife had planted years ago. He stopped near the fountain and turned to face me, and I saw vulnerability in his eyes that still surprised me despite everything. "I am not a good man," he said without preamble. "I have done things that cannot be undone, hurt people, made choices that have left scars on this city and on my own soul. My life is dangerous, and that will never completely change, no matter how legitimate I make my operations. There will always be enemies, always be people who want to take what I have, who see you and Thomas as the fastest way to destroy me. He reached for my hand and his grip was steady despite the uncertainty in his voice. But I will spend every single day for the rest of my life trying to keep you safe, trying to build something better, trying to be worthy of what you have given me. Marry me, Eleanor. Not because it is smart or safe or easy, but because I love you, and I want every morning to start with you, and every night to end with you, and I want Thomas to have a family that is whole. I want to build a life with you in the wreckage of who I used to be. The ring was simple, a single diamond that caught the fading light, and I realized he had been carrying it, waiting for the right moment, or perhaps just for courage. I said yes without hesitation, said it through tears that were joy and fear in equal measure, acknowledged again the impossible truth that I loved this dangerous, complicated man and the life we were building. We went inside together and told Thomas, who looked between us with solemn eyes, and then hugged us both with fierce 8-year-old certainty. That night at dinner, the three of us around the table with pasta and salad and the ordinary chaos of family, I looked at Alexander and Thomas and felt the weight of home settle into my bones. We were extraordinary and ordinary all at once, a family built from a found wallet and impossible choices, from danger survived